كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. In these last two videos, we're going to be looking at various issues related to food. So we started talking about the issue of istihala, and inshallah in the next few videos we're going to be going into the discussion of istihala in quite a lot of detail. We're going to be looking at what exactly is considered istihala. If, for example, there's a chemical change that takes place in a product, in an item, is that sufficient for it to be considered istihala or not? We'll then be looking at different fatawa on the issue of istihala, and the case study that we're going to be looking at is the issue of gelatin. So I'm going to break down the discussion of gelatin into three parts. One is going to be the gelatin made from pigs, gelatin made from bovine hide, cow hide, and gelatin made from bovine bone. And I'll explain why we're going to have to break this discussion down into three different components, because of the differences that those sources, whether it's pig, bovine hide or bovine bone, play in terms of the process of gelatin. In the last video of this series, we'll start looking at a fatwa from Darul Ulum Karachi, which talks about the issue of gelatin in pigs and istihala, and their argument is going to be that istihala does not take place. So in order to understand the fatwa, we're going to look at what exactly is the process of making gelatin, and then we'll be looking at why exactly they issue a fatwa stating that the process of making gelatin with pig fat does not result in istihala. So we'll be looking at some of what the experts say in the field in regards to the process of making gelatin, and then we'll be making comparisons between that process and cooking meat. So there'll be a comparison made between the process of making gelatin and the process of cooking meat, because we know the ruling for one of them, but we don't know the ruling for the other. We know that cooking meat does not result in istihala, but the process of making gelatin we don't know. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wal aqibatu lil muttaqin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil anbiya'i wal mursaleen Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. We are now heading into our last few videos of this module, of this section. So we are looking at food items, and in regards to food items, we've covered in a lot of detail the issue of alcohol, the different types of drinks, and we had a look at the practical application of alcohol as well. Then we look at some issues related to related to non-liquid items which provide intoxication and so on. So now for these last few sections, we are looking at different issues related to food, and we've touched upon things like e-numbers, general food principles, vinegar and so on. We are focusing now on the issue of istihala. So the issue of istihala. Now again, we've given a brief introduction of istihala, that it's, there's a change whereby a considerable amount of change takes place. The original product is no longer the original product, it's actually a new product in its entirety. Now sometimes just by changing the name, that's not sufficient. Sometimes just by color or taste or smell changing, that's not sufficient. There has to be a substantial change. So we'll be having a look at that in a bit more detail here now, because we're going to be taking the case of gelatin. Now bear in mind that this issue of istihala is something that has been discussed from the earliest, fuqaha, from the early periods, right from the original, the founding madhahib as well, right? So this issue of istihala is not a new thing, and of course, as we've mentioned with the case of alcohol, wine, and turning into vinegar, there is mention of it and support of it from the ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. So it is a very it's a discussion that has been going on for a large amount of time, for a long period of time. However, as time goes along and we become more well versed with the world around us, and we start breaking things more and more into smaller categories and smaller groups and so on, other questions start to arise. So initially, traditionally a person may say that, look, when is something considered istihala? You say, okay, there has to be a total change of that product into something else. But now with the development of science and how science has advanced, and we start looking at things on a more smaller level, on a more micro level, we start taking things apart based on their particles and their composition and so on. So we are able to kind of deconstruct and dismantle an item into smaller components. So then the question becomes that now we are able to look at things on a more on a more detailed level. Exactly what type of change is going to be considered sufficient for istihala to take place? Now this is a question, and this question is continuously debated and discussed. There are many fiqh bodies and kind of organizations that have debated this issue and discussed this issue, whether just from an istihala perspective or whether from a case study perspective, like gelatine. So for example, the gelatine case is actually a very hotly debated issue. You have some fiqh seminars and some fiqh conferences that have concluded that the method in which gelatine is processed actually results in istihala taking place, and therefore even if the gelatine originated from pork source, then actually it would be fine to consume for Muslims, because now it's a totally different product in its entirety. On the other hand, you have other fiqh bodies and groups and seminars and programs have taken place, and resolutions over there have been that istihala does not take place. So the concept of istihala seems like a very simple concept, in the sense that one item is changing from what it was into something totally different and into a totally different form and a different product. But the question is, at which point of change? So obviously change is taking place, but at which point of change do we consider it that now it is istihala, right? At which point? How much change needs to take place? To what extent does that change have to be that we can say, okay, now here we have a case of istihala? So just say, for example, and I might have given this scenario before, that a person is cooking meat. Now the meat is raw, and as you cook it, it starts to change in its texture, the tenderness, it starts to become more tough, and so on, right? So there are changes that are taking place within it, and cooked meat is quite distinct from raw meat. But at the end of the day, we still consider it to be meat, but there are changes that have taken place. Now those changes that have taken place between raw meat to cooked meat, we don't consider them sufficient for istihala. At the end of the day, chops, cooked or uncooked, are still going to be considered to be chops and are still going to be considered meat. Yes, one is going to be consumable and the other one is not going to be consumable, right? So istihala has not taken place there. So because of this issue of what exactly is considered istihala, the debates and the discussions are constantly ongoing. One of the most recent articles that have kind of come by my way is an article on istihala by Mufti Faraz Adam. Mufti Faraz Adam, who is a Mufti based in Leicester in England, UK, and he's a specialist in Islamic finance, and he has a IFTA institution as well. So recently he's been releasing articles on different topics, and the issue of istihala is something that he has written on as well. And I'm sure if you just research Mufti Faraz Adam and istihala, you should very easily be able to find this paper. And in there again, there's a long discussion as to what exactly is istihala, looking at the definition of istihala, looking at what the fuqaha have said regarding istihala, the newer applications, and issues and queries surrounding it. So this issue of istihala, it's something that is constantly being debated, something that is will be debated for a while to come, and you may get differing opinions on when it comes to the application side. So like I said, with the case of gelatine, you will get cases where some scholars are saying that istihala has taken place, and there are going to be cases where scholars are saying istihala has not taken place. Even within the Hanafi fiqh and the Hanafi fuqaha, contemporary fuqaha, there's a big debate as to whether istihala takes place with gelatine or istihala does not take place with gelatine. So just bear in mind that this introductory point that I want to kind of just mention is that just because a change is taking place, that does not necessarily mean that sufficient change has taken place for it to be considered istihala, right? Now somebody might say that what if there's a chemical change that takes place? Well, even in that case, just because there's a chemical change taking place, that too does not mean that istihala has taken place, right? Just because there's a chemical change, that too does not mean that istihala has taken place. So what we're going to do in the next video or the next few videos, is we're going to be looking at the issue of gelatine, especially pork gelatine, and we'll be looking at what some scholars have said in regards to this, those that hold a more conservative view, and we'll kind of be unpacking that opinion and looking at the different components of it. And then what that will do is that will equip you that when you look at other argument from other places, then you'll kind of at least have an idea of the way in which the istihala discussion kind of operates, some of the key components and considerations in regards to istihala, and some of the important references in that regard. So that is the issue of istihala kind of in a nutshell. Inshallah, in the next video we'll be looking at the case of gelatine. So first there is the issue of gelatine made from pigs, then you have the issue of gelatine made from cow hide, skin, right? Now remember, there's a big difference between the two. And then of course you have the issue of gelatine from cow bone, right? Bovine bone and bovine hide and pig. So these are the three ways that we'll be looking at the issue of gelatine, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wal aqibatu lil muttaqin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyid al-anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. So as I mentioned in the last video, that we're going to be looking at the issue of gelatine and istihala from two perspectives. The first perspective that we're going to be having a look at is istihala from the perspective of gelatine in pork, in pig. Then we'll be looking at the issue of istihala of gelatine. Again, to look at gelatine is the case study we're using, from bovine hide and then bovine bone. Now the main difference between these scenarios is that when it comes to pig is najisul ayn. Now what najisul ayn means is that every component of that animal is going to be considered impure and najis, right? And you can't benefit from it at all in any way, shape or form. So if you take, for example, a cow, right? Now a cow, when it's killed, if it's slaughtered according to the Shari'i method, then let's take a cow that's not slaughtered according to Shari'i method. It's just killed without the tasmiyah, without a Muslim, and so on, right? So this cow that has been killed, the parts and the ajza of that cow, some of it will be pure and tahir, and other parts will be najis and impure, right? So there are parts of an animal which are always going to become pure even if it wasn't slaughtered according to the Shari'i method. So for example, bone, hair, these kind of things are always considered pure. Then there are going to be elements which are considered impure and najis, right? For example, blood, right? That will always be considered impure and najis. Then you have parts of the animal which are impure but can go through a purification process. So they are impure but they can go through a purification process. So for example, the hide, right, the skin of the cow. Remember, this cow was not slaughtered according to Shari'i method. So the skin is going to be considered impure and najis. However, if it's taken through the process of dabagha, which is mentioned in the books of fiqh in the chapter of tahara, right? This issue of dibagha is the process through which you can take the skin and the hide, and you essentially you are purifying it. So the end product, once you've taken it through the stages of purification, and there's a lengthy discussion as to what type of purification that has to be. Again, that's not the remit of our discussion, so we won't go into that in too much detail. But once that process has taken place, then the end result and the hide and the skin that you have at the end is going to be considered pure and is going to be considered tahir. Is going to be considered tahir. So with animals, generally with nearly all animals, if the animal is not slaughtered according to the Shari'i method, then there are going to be parts of the animal which are haram, parts and najis. There are parts of the animal which are going to be tahir, clean, and there are going to be parts which start off najis and impure, but they can be cleaned. So that's why there's going to be a difference when it comes to bovine. Again, if an animal is slaughtered according to Shari'i method, then all of those parts become clean anyway. So the hide will automatically become clean and will be tahir. But if the cow is not slaughtered according to Shari'i method, then when it comes to the hide and the skin, then there needs to be a separate discussion, because we have to discuss as to whether that skin has gone through purification process enough for it to be considered clean. So therefore, when the gelatin is then extracted from the fat and from the skin, then that gelatin is originating from pure or impure sources. As for bone is something that is considered pure, even if the animal is not considered slaughtered according to Shari'i method. So because the bone is something which is considered to be pure, we don't need to worry about whether the purification process has taken place or not. In that sense, there will be some other discussion that take place, but we don't have to worry about it to that extent as we did have to worry about it when it came to the issue of the hide. As for the pig scenario, now some of these animals, cow are not najisul ain. As for the pig scenario, pig is najisul ain, which means every single component of it is najis and is impure. Every single component of it is najis and is impure. Whether that's the blood, whether that's the meat, whether that's the bone, whether that's the hair, anything. So if they use pig hair for example, for bristles, whether that's in paintbrushes or whether that's in toothbrushes and so on, right? A pig is najisul ain. Whether they use the skin to make leather, and that's then going to be used to make a wallet or a phone cover, or for shoes and sandals and other items which you're going to be wearing, then that is still going to be najisul ain. So no matter how much you try to clean it, no matter what processes you take it through, if it originates from a pig, then it's going to be najisul ain, and it's going to be impure and najis, and it cannot be utilized in any way, shape or form. So that's why this issue, this case of istihala, we're going to be looking at it from the case study of gelatin, but there are again going to be 3 components here, even though we're looking at the one case study of gelatin. We're going to be looking at gelatin made from pigs specifically. Then we're going to be looking at gelatin which originates from bovine hide, and then we'll be looking finally at the issue of gelatin made from bovine bone. Now again, from a practical perspective, what generally happens is, if you know that a product has gelatin inside it, it's very easy nowadays to contact manufacturers and they tell you the source of the gelatin. So for example, sometimes what happens is you're given medication and the capsule, it mentions within the ingredients of the medication that the capsule is made from gelatin. Now a very quick email to the manufacturer of the medication, and you ask them that what is the source of this gelatin, and they will tell you if it's pork based or if it's bovine based. And we'll be looking at, when we get to the discussion of bovine, as to what the ruling will be in regards to utilizing gelatin made from bovine sources, especially bovine which has not been slaughtered according to the Shari'i method. So let's start now. So going back to istihala again, because everything is hinged on this issue of istihala. Just because a chemical change takes place does not mean that istihala has taken place, right? So we're going to have a relationship between istihala and chemical change. Just because istihala takes place, just because a chemical change takes place, that doesn't mean istihala takes place. Right? Just because there was a chemical change, that doesn't mean that istihala has taken place. However, if we say that something, there is istihala that has taken place, right? If we say that in this scenario we agree that there has been istihala has taken place, then in that scenario, then for sure, with certainty, a chemical change will definitely have taken place, right? Chemical change will definitely have taken place. So two things here, istihala and chemical change. One is more generic and one incorporates the other, and the other doesn't. It was like the relationship we had between alcohol and ethanol, that every ethanol is an alcohol, but not every alcohol is going to be considered an ethanol. So the issue here with chemical change is that not every chemical change is going to be istihala. However, every istihala will have some sort of chemical change that is taking place. Like for example, with the case of alcohol, grape juice turning into alcohol, or alcohol turning into vinegar, and you have the issue of the animal falling into the salt mine and turning into salt. And in all of these cases, there is also going to be a chemical change within the item as well. Now, with the issue of, let's take an example of cooked meat as well. Right? When meat is cooked, various changes take place, like color, taste, and smell, which the scientists refer to as chemical change. Scientists refer to the cooking of meat as a chemical change. And again, I'll give you a quote here from the Encyclopedia of Meat Science. Cooking is the most common heat treatment applied to meat. Its primary aim is to cause structural and chemical change that will make the meat more palatable. Now, no one says that this is istihala, that once you cook pork chops, now because it's cooked, it's halal. No, it's not allowed still. But we know that there's a chemical change taking place. Another quote, cooked meat flavor is the result of chemical reactions that occur between the lipid and lean portions of meat during cooking. So again, here you can see that there are chemical changes taking place within the process of cooking meats. And therefore we know that because this is an istihala, we know that just because a chemical change takes place doesn't necessarily mean that istihala is going to take place and is going to.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Now, a very lengthy and detailed discussion that we want to have a look at, which we will discuss in this video, and then we will also continue to discuss in the following videos as well, is the issue of istihala in detail. So we mentioned that istihala is the change of one item into a totally, it changes itself into a totally different product and into a totally different item. Now, there are some case scenarios that we're going to be looking at with the issue of istihala. One case scenario that we're going to be looking at is the issue of gelatin. So we're going to be looking in detail at the issue of gelatin, and in the process of making gelatin, does istihala take place or not? So just say, for example, you have pig fat, right? Now pig fat is then used, and a large percentage of European gelatin actually originates from pigs, right? So pig fat is very commonly used to create gelatin. Now the question is there sufficient change in the pig fat that we can deem the gelatin which is now produced to be a totally different item, thereby changing the ruling from unlawful to lawful and from najis to tahir, to pure, right? Or is there not enough change? And that then raises the question that what type of change is considered to be valid change for istihala, and what type of change is not considered to be valid for istihala. So we'll be looking at gelatin in a lot of detail. We'll also be looking at the issue of soaps, because soaps again are also made using fat and animal fat as well. So the question is there sufficient istihala taking place in that case as well, or is there not sufficient istihala taking place in those scenarios? So let's start just by the issue of istihala and what is istihala. Istihala is when the subject that you are looking at turns into the substance of that subject turns into something totally different. The subject of that substance, the component, the key components of that subject change so much that the entire subject becomes something totally different. Now, examples that the fuqaha gave is when alcohol changes into vinegar, two totally different products, right? Another example that they gave is if a pig is walking by, salty water or a salt lake or a salt mine, and falls inside, and it stays there for years and years and years. And as people are mining the salt, they realize that, this pig has actually turned into salt. It has now become salt. It is no longer a pig anymore. It is actually just salt. It has kind of converted. So there's an entire change from an animal into salt, a change from alcohol into vinegar. If an entire change and the substance changes, the reality, the hakika of it, the intrinsic main qualities and components of it have changed, then it will be considered istihala. If just the name changes, or the smell, or the taste, or the color changes, then that is not going to be considered to be a change, right? Istihala. That will be a change, but it won't be considered to be istihala. In istihala, the reality of the item has to change. It has to become something totally different. So now, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, when you have this process of istihala, of one thing changing into something else, there has to be 100% full conversion. The original subject has to turn into the next subject totally in its entirety. There can't be anything left in the original format. So for example, if you're converting wine into vinegar, and after you've converted it into vinegar, 99% of the wine has become vinegar, but there's still 1% which is still wine, and it's kind of just mixed in with the vinegar. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, that will not be allowed. 100% of the wine has to turn into vinegar. According to Sahibain, there just has to be a majority change. As long as 51% of that wine has turned into vinegar, and of course generally you go for more anyway, 70, 80, 90%, 95%. As long as the majority have changed, then technically they will say istihala is done. Istihala is done. Now we see that Sahibain's opinion is a more kind of relaxed opinion, is awsa, it has more scope in it. However, Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion has more caution in it. There's more caution in the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. Now, let's go into our case scenario of soap. When it comes to making soaps using animal fat, there are two processes that are used. The traditional process, which the fuqaha generally mention, is the cold process, right? Now you have a newer process called the full boiled process, which is actually a lot better, a lot more efficient. It actually results in less than 1% of the original fat remaining as fat. So as you're changing this fat into soap, it's such a good process, the new contemporary processes, that actually less than 1% remains of fat. The rest of it, actually 99+% turns into soap. The cold process, on the other hand, isn't as great, but that is a process which generally the fuqaha have utilized and the fuqaha have discussed based on, because that's the process that they would have been using. Now, what is the process here? The process is called saponification, right? And that is the idea there is to react the fat with an alkali, right? So the fat is reacted with an alkali. This is called saponification, and it results in two products. It results in soap, and it results in glycerol. It results in soap and glycerol. So this soap essentially started from animal fat. Now just say the animal fat came from pig, and that fat was then used to turn into soap. So you now have a soap which is created originally from animal fat. So that's why we need to know that has istihala taken place. Okay, we call it soap, but is there enough change that has taken place or not? Now how much change? According to Sahibain, there needs to be at least 51% change, and according to Imam Hanifa, there needs to be a complete change. The experts of the field say that some fat and some alkali will remain. Some fat and some alkali will remain, and there won't be 100% full transformation. Approximately 15% of free alkali and unsaponified fat will remain, but that means how many? 85% has actually changed into soap. Now here we can see that according to then Imam Abu Hanifa, this would not be allowed, but according to Sahibain, this would be permissible, and this would be allowed, and this will be permissible. And we will consider this to be istihala. This will be considered to be istihala. So the process of making soaps via cold process, which is the more, the traditional method, will actually be permissible according to the position of Sahibain, and we say the istihala. So that means even more so the newer processes, which are more refined and more effective, will be also permissible. I'm going to read a couple of quotes here from this research. Again, a lot of these fatwa that I am quoting now, they are from the research of a mufti in the UK called Mufti Sarfraz, and he did this research under and when he was a student at Darul Uloom Karachi. So these fatwa have been signed off by Darul Uloom Karachi also, right? So it mentions here that cold process soap are very liable to contain free alkali and unsaponified fat. When a cold process soap is made to the conventional basic formula, about 15% of unsaponified fats are present. As we mentioned, this is then fine according to Imam Abu Hanifa. So that's the issue of istihala when it comes to soap. In the next discussion, in the next few videos, what we're going to be having a look at, we're going to be having a look at the issue now of gelatine. Gelatine is a bit more controversial because there are different fatwa, there are different fiqh bodies that have discussed the issue of gelatine, and some have concluded that istihala takes place, and others have concluded that istihala does not take place. So we're going to be having a look at the argument from Darul Uloom Karachi, which argues that istihala does not take place. Unfortunately, we won't have time to go into all the different fatwa and research papers, but this will kind of hopefully give you an idea of the discussion, and then you're free to kind of look into other research papers and articles that are there on this issue of istihala. There's also another recent paper that has come out by Mufti Faraz Adam on the issue of istihala also. So we'll be looking at the issue of istihala, and the case scenario we'll be looking at is gelatine, especially gelatine made from pigs. And then after that, inshallah, once we've concluded that discussion, we'll be looking at a couple of other discussions related to some food products and food items and some contemporary practices to see what the Sharia has to say in regards to those issues.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin wa la aqibatu lil muttaqin. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyid al-Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. In this last few videos, we have we've gone into a bit more of detail in regards to istihala, and we mentioned that just because chemical change takes place doesn't mean istihala takes place, but if istihala takes place, then definitely a chemical change will take place. We then spoke about a few different fiqh bodies that exist and their fatwa on the issue of istihala, that some say that istihala takes place with gelatine, and some say that gelatine, in the process of making gelatine, istihala does not take place. And we started having a look at the fatwa of Darul Uloom Karachi in this regard. I also highlighted the difference between the three sources of gelatine, which is pig fat, bovine hide and bovine bone, and that pig fat is the most difficult scenario because the pig fat is najisul ain. We also meant that for bovine hide, that even if it's not slaughtered properly, it can become purified by taking it through the correct processes. So that discussion will be different there. And then when it comes to bovine bone, again the discussion will be different there. Why? Because when it comes to bovine bone, bone is something which is generally pure anyway in the first place. So therefore the discussion of gelatine, first we'll have an issue of istihala, whether that takes place or not. And if we establish that we've established that istihala does not take place, so therefore is the ruling still going to be the same across these three products, or is the ruling still going to vary across these three products? So we just started having a look at the issue of what exactly is the process of processing gelatine, and we said that it's a breakdown of the structure of the protein collagen, which is then what that starts to form into gelatine. So essentially, the process of making gelatine is that the collagen goes through the process of denaturation, and this process is also the same as hydrolysis, and as a result, you then have this gelatine-like product. There are going to be other stages involved as well, but this is the first initial stage, which is going to be relevant when we compare with meat products.